The Chiefs are just the common denominator lately, aren't they?
Yeah, that seems to be the case. That's what happens when you have a all-time great quarterback, right? When you've got that guy at the helm, a lot of things work around him, and that's clearly where we're at with Patrick Mahomes these days. It's been, kind of crazy. I was thinking back the other day, actually, for a lot of people who are hardcore football fans, they'll remember on Christmas Day, the Chiefs are playing the Raiders, right? And I think, and it was a fairly early game. I think it might have been like a noon or 11:30 kick, whatever. Who can remember these days with the way the NFL just oversaturates
Oh
every
yeah.
holiday, right? But nevertheless, I remember on Christmas Day, kind of like we were hosting at my house here, and we were just kind of like getting ready, and it was like I just assumed that the Chiefs were going to absolutely destroy the Raiders because they had a lot in the line. They were still kind of playing for home field advantage, and no, that's not what happened. Jack Jones actually had that pick six, which kind of set the tone for the Chiefs. I'm sorry, for the Raiders. And the Chiefs never really were able to find themselves that day. Now, maybe that should have been a tip off that Antonio Pierce actually had the Raiders moving in the right direction. But I just remember thinking on Christmas Day, man, I can't believe the Chiefs are at this spot. And now, fast forward, whatever, 8 weeks later, and they're back in the Super Bowl, and they really haven't changed a whole lot from Christmas Day. They really couldn't because you can't make any roster moves at that point in the middle of the season. But you just have a little bit more from guys like Marquez Valdez Scantling coming up with a catch here or there that he wasn't making during the regular season. You have Rashee Rice really coming into his own and kind of establishing himself as the alternative option, to Travis Kelsey. So now not every team can focus. And then, of course, the defense, which has really led the way for the Chiefs. But it's just kind of like crazy to me that they've done it, and they did it beating the Bills. They did it beating the Ravens. So maybe we should all stop, being surprised when we see Patrick Mahomes lead the Chiefs to do these sort of things at this point. But I have to admit, on Christmas Day, I did not think the Chiefs would be Super Bowl bound.
Yeah, I remember that Christmas game. I think everybody was surprised. Just the fact that, like you said, the Raiders were going in there and just beating up the Chiefs. And the Chiefs just fell off all regular season. I mean, at least compared to what we're used to from them. The offense wasn't quite clicking. They were dropping all kinds of balls. I mean, they just felt, I don't want to say beatable, but they just weren't automatic like they've been the
Hmm.
last few years. And going into the playoffs, I was high, not in any particular order, but I was high on the Niners, the Ravens, and even Buffalo. I thought Buffalo was finally peaking at the right time. But once the playoffs got started, I found myself thinking, well, I like the Chiefs over Miami. I like the Chiefs over, Buffalo because even though it was going to be Mahomes' first true road game, I couldn't bet against Mahomes. I can't bet against the Chiefs. And then, of course, with Baltimore, I said I think they're going to beat Baltimore as well because I just can't count them out. And I know I told you a couple weeks ago, for me, the Chiefs have become the old Patriots already to where I just can't count them out no matter what the matchup might look like or how good, say, the Ravens might have been. I thought Mahomes versus Jackson, or however you want to slice it up. I just couldn't count the Chiefs out. And did you feel the same way once the playoffs got going, where you were thinking, maybe you didn't like the Chiefs as a team better, but Mahomes or that X factor, or were you still thinking I like the Ravens or I like the Bills better?
For the Bills, I was a little concerned heading into that game. I thought that in Buffalo, and to your point, it felt like the Bills were finally kind of at a point where I didn't necessarily think the Bills were Super Bowl bound either, but I thought this it was an opportunity for them to get the Chiefs. So the way that game played out though was a little bit surprising. I thought the Bills in some ways let the Chiefs play a game that benefited them. I think the Bills should have done more to they tried to play a ball control game where they limited the number of possessions. And the truth is that as the more explosive offense, at least the way I felt with Josh Allen at the helm, I thought they should have tried to push the tempo a little bit more. And they didn't. They were more willing to, just kind of like eat some clock, long sustained drives, and limit the number of possessions. And ultimately, I think that ended up being their downfall. Of course, they did have some moments too where they struggled against the Bills defense. So, or I'm sorry, the Chiefs defense. But that's one thing I keep getting back to is for everything that's easy to just say, oh yeah, it's Mahomes leading the way again and having Mahomes magic. The Chiefs defense, has really stifled you know, the Dolphins was a completely different aberration because of the weather, and Tua's got his own limitations, so that game didn't impress me nearly as much. But
Yeah.
the way they shut down the Bills, and then it's hard to say, how much was them and how much was the Ravens not really committing to the run and making it more difficult on the Chiefs defense. So you got to put a little bit of it on the Ravens. But heading into the Baltimore game, maybe this is silly for me to have doubted Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, but that I truly thought that the Ravens were going to win that game because they have been so good. DVOA, which is one of the metrics that everybody likes to cite when you're talking about just how good a team is as a whole. Like, the Ravens were the best team ever heading into an AFC Championship game at that moment to actually make the AFC Championship game. Like, they had no peer. And so it really felt like, okay, if ever the Ravens were going to be able to beat the Chiefs, this was a perfect scenario. And, again, I don't know how much of it you have to put on Todd Monken for not really committing to the run. How much of it was Lamar Jackson had some opportunities. He had a couple of deep throws that he did not connect on. He overthrew his wide receivers on a few. And, those are big plays that you can't really get back in those big moments. And of course, Zay Flowers with that critical, not just unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, but also the huge fumble at the goal line, taking the ball out of bounds. That possession in itself really felt like the game changer for the Chiefs. So even though Mahomes survives in advance and gets to another Super Bowl, it does feel like they've been a little bit blessed along the way here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, I feel that. I kind of see that too. Like Baltimore offensively didn't do much. Mahomes just had to do enough, really. Maybe the Buffalo game is one that stands out, and that's on that path for them just because of going on the road and
Mm-hmm.
getting by. Like you said, it felt like the Bills probably one of their best chances in terms of at least getting past Kansas City. Maybe not the Super Bowl, but at least I think if I don't know what would have happened if it was Ravens and Bills, but I think I would have probably felt better, even better, that is, about the Ravens in that situation. But because, like I said, I was high on Baltimore all season, and then playoffs happen, and then people are going to doubt Lamar again. But yeah,
Real quick,
yeah,
I tend to agree with you. Had the Bills made it through to play the Ravens, I think the Ravens would definitely have been able to beat the Bills because the Bills defense, that was the real problem, I think, for them is they really couldn't stop the Chiefs. And, partially because they don't have as good of a defense as some other of the playoff teams, but also they were just completely destroyed by injury at that point. They had some key defensive players out. So I think the Chiefs really took advantage of that as well. So, and the one back to the Chiefs Ravens game, one more minute here, because it really felt like after the first couple of drives that the Chiefs were just going to run away and hide, right? But I thought it was interesting. The Ravens defense really did, kind of step up and keep them in the game because I kept feeling like had the Chiefs just scored one more touchdown on several different drives, that the game was going to be completely out of reach for the Ravens. And to the Ravens defense's credit, they never really let up. And so the Chiefs allowed the Ravens to hang around in that game. And like I said, we get back to when, Zay Flowers, if he just breaks the plane of the goal, you wonder how that game might have been different.
yeah, I remember that play. It's just yeah. It came down to like little stuff like that for the most part. Yeah, defense kept them in it, and yeah, talking defense, the Chiefs for them and like the last few years at least, defense wasn't really their strength, and here it is. One of the reasons why they're even in this situation now, the offense wasn't great throughout the regular season. The defense was good, and in the playoffs, the defense has been really good. I saw where they're the youngest defense, or it's the Chiefs have the youngest defense in the league, and it's up there with like the Ravens defense from I think it was 2000, the Buccaneers from 2002, the Legion of Boom Seahawks defense in terms of points allowed in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they've been just on fire, and like I said, the Chiefs. The Chiefs just felt weird all year. They're the defending champs, but it just felt like this is the year they're gonna get tripped up, and again they just make it happen. It's like they kind of flip that switch like those really good teams can do in any league, where you kind of get through the regular season but you make the playoffs and then all of a sudden things just kind of click. Do you think they just kind of flip that I know you were talking about the defense and everything, but does it just kind of feel like they're just good enough to where they can flip that switch and things can just kind of happen?
I don't know. That's one of those things where I don't I don't I don't know if it necessarily is as simple as saying that because I think look, Mahomes, especially, you know, I don't have him in front of me, but like, and I could probably pull him up too as we're talking here, but like, his career stats in the playoffs, which now I think is he through 17 games in the playoffs, maybe 18, I can't remember off the top of my head, but like his playoff stats now are over the equivalent of what would be a NFL regular season game. And if you really dig in and look at him, I think that's one of those things where you see the difference, right, between someone like him and what others do. We're talking in the playoffs against the best of the best, right? Like you're playing elite teams for the most part in the playoffs. I just grabbed it here. He's played 17 games, so now it's a full NFL season for Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, and he is 14-3. He has a 67% completion percentage. He's thrown for 4,802 yards. He's got 39 touchdown passes and only 7 interceptions. And oh, by the way, he's also got another 458 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. So we're talking about a guy who, through the playoffs has given you that would be an MVP season for almost, virtually any NFL season if a guy put together those stats in a regular season. And Patrick Mahomes has now done that in his postseason career against the best of the best. And that is something where when the moment is at its biggest, that's where I think you can't really count out what he gives you, right? Like it's just so hard to, you
Yeah.
know, it's an intangible that most quarterbacks don't have. So in the biggest moments, Patrick Mahomes plays his best. And so if you want to say, they flipped a switch, that's where I think you could point to Patrick Mahomes being the difference maker. But again, it's these plays here or there that, when you're playing close games, like it'll flip on a play
Yeah.
here or there. And, same thing, I get the Chiefs would have gotten the ball back, but of course, missing, wide right for the Bills, that takes them out of the game. That ends the game essentially right there, and, I'll go back to it again, the Zay Flowers fumble. I think the Ravens could have won that game if he crosses the goal line there. So, it's all these key little moments, but so I don't think it's as simple as just flipping the switch. Maybe it's just when you've got a guy like Patrick Mahomes who, he gets everyone's comping him to Tom Brady, but
Yeah.
and maybe it's not just Tom Brady, but it's also like Joe Montana, like famously Joe Montana. He's Joe Cool, like in the Super Bowl against the Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Montana with an opportunity to, I believe they were trailing by 3, if memory serves, against the Bengals. It was the second time the 49ers played the Bengals, so it was back in like 1989, 90. And the 2 minutes to go, 2-minute drill, the Niners are trailing by 3. And as he's getting ready to start the drill in the huddle, 92 yards away from their own 8, Joe Montana famously, as he's calling out the play, he points out and says, "Hey, is that John Candy in the stands?" And
Yeah.
like to just basically, settle the nerves of his teammates, but also like pointing out that like in the biggest moments he was able to be calm, cool, and collected. And that's the thing I think you see from Patrick Mahomes is like he never gets frazzled. I think we saw a bit of that from both Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, right? In the
Yeah.
fourth quarter in some big moments. Like, there was but before they missed the ball, missed the kick wide right, Josh Allen, misses a throw to who was it? Was it Gabe? No, it wasn't Gabe Davis. Who was in the end zone? Was it Shakir? Can't remember. But he,
Me neither.
he went for it on that drive. There's a wide open Stefon Diggs, going over the middle, who we could have just checked it down to. So it's little things like that where, we don't make a lot out of those things, but I think that's where you see the difference between a guy like Mahomes and you see the similarities between him and Tom Brady and Joe Montana, the all-time greats who have won 3 or more Super Bowls. And you say the reason they can do it is because in the biggest moments, they just don't get nervous. They do what they need to do. Whereas his contemporaries, the Josh Allens, the Lamar Jacksons, they maybe get a little bit nervous because they've never actually won a Super Bowl. And so they do grip the ball a little bit tighter and they try and make a play that, while if you can pull it off, more power to you, but maybe the degree of difficulty is harder than just taking the dump off to Stephon Diggs right over the middle and, getting a first down and putting your team in a better position. So I think it's the little things like that that we don't maybe drill down on, but I think that's where you see sometimes the difference between Mahomes and some other great quarterbacks in this league.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as Mahomes' legacy now, I mean, it's this what fourth Super Bowl. He's 2-1 right now, so if he wins a third, that just puts him in an even more exclusive air. But like you were talking about comps to Tom Brady, and right away, once the Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl, I'm hearing people say, "Oh, he's the Mahomes is the GOAT, or he's about to be the GOAT." And I feel like you're a little bit more measured on this sort of stuff. But if he does win this Super Bowl, that's 3-4 already, and he's just basically in the peak of his career. So who knows? The sky's the limit. But really, what I'm trying to get at is
Hmm.
already, do you put him up there as like a top five quarterback just because
Oh,
of the accomplishments, the Super Bowls, and all that stuff?
yeah. Look, I think top five makes it pretty easy. It's pretty
Yeah,
easy to put him in the top five. I think if you want to get all sports radio-y, podcasty, Mount Rushmore, I think you
yeah,
could pretty easily put him on there with Brady and Montana, and then we can just debate all day about whether you would throw Marino or Elway, or some of the other greats on that fourth spot. But I think because of their Super Bowl wins, Montana, Brady and Mahomes kind of stand above the rest. We'll see. Now, here's the thing though. It's not fait accompli, of course, because I do think the Niners have a decent chance of, they're better than decent, right? They're the
yeah,
favorite in this game.
right,
So it's
yeah,
certainly possible that the 49ers come out, and if they get the run game going, especially their zone running game, the Chiefs struggle stopping zone runs, which is what the 49ers do so well. So, there's certainly a path, an easy path to see victory for the 49ers. So it's crazy if if the Chiefs lose this Super Bowl, all of a sudden, everyone's going to say, yeah, well, the whole idea of him being the GOAT is now completely off the table because he's lost, half of the Super Bowls he's always been in, which is always, kind of absurd that we,
yeah,
you know, basically boil it down to something, so simplistic. But whatever, that's kind of the way people go. I think calling Mahomes the GOAT is silly because,
yeah,
he's like 7 Super Bowls, and not just 7 Super Bowls, but, you know, 9 Super Bowl appearances for Tom Brady is just absurd. So, I think the crazy thing is you can say, well, Patrick Mahomes has, he's in his 4th Super Bowl already at this age. So, he's certainly got a path where you could be in play with matching some of those Brady accomplishments, but you know, we're riding the high right now. Like if next year the Chiefs for
yeah,
whatever reason can't get back to the Super Bowl, things like Kelsey retires, right?
yeah,
All of a sudden, once Travis Kelsey retires now, and I'm sure Rasheed Rice looks like he's going to have a really nice career, but you're going to need more than just him if Mahomes is going to continue to threaten Brady's records and win some Super Bowls. So the Chiefs are gonna have to find another offensive weapon, somewhat in the vicinity of what Travis Kelsey brings to the table because it's been crazy to see what they've gotten to the Super Bowl with this year. But I can guarantee you, if you take Travis Kelsey off this team, there's no way in hell that the Chiefs would be in the Super Bowl right now. So it's one of those things where it's easy to say, oh, I could see Pat Mahomes, going on and playing in 10 Super Bowls and winning 8.
yeah,
But the reality is that, it's so hard to do. And so that's where I try not to get too crazy.
yeah,
I think he's like the crazy thing is this through this, whatever it is, 7 years in his career to actually say, hey, he's got a chance to compete with Brady. That's amazing in itself.
hmm,
So, but yeah, I think there's still a lot of work to do, and some of it's out of his own hands. He needs Brett Veach to continue to put good players around him, and then we'll see how long does Andy Reid, truly want to continue coaching. Now, I think if I were Andy Reid, I wouldn't be looking to get out anytime soon. But again,
right,
it's easier said when you're my age as opposed to Andy Reid's age. He may actually say, "All right, well, I've done a lot, and it may be time for him to go." Although, as I say that, I don't really believe that because Andy
yeah,
Reid is, always been an NFL head coach. He's always wanted to coach, so I don't know what he would do in his free time. So but nevertheless, at some point that day will come if it's not, soon. And then you wonder, okay, well, who would the replacement be? you need a lot to go, to be great around you if you're going to make Super Bowl runs year after year.
I do feel I don't know that I'm laughing only because I'm imagining if the next coach really was Matt Nagy. I don't know that I would think the Chiefs are as invincible as they feel right now, just because you have Mahomes, but then it's like, okay, I don't know if it'll be Matt Nagy anyway, but I didn't think he'd be the offensive coordinator either. So here we are with that.
I mean, it's a comfort level thing, and
Yeah,
I don't know. The other thing too is like they've got Steve Spagnuolo on the staff as well,
yeah.
and clearly he's got head coaching, in his
Hmm.
career as well. So you could see it, kind of going both ways. I don't know. Like I guess you probably it's hard too because Spagnuolo had no real success as a head coach, but it was in St. Louis with a
Yeah,
Rams franchise that was a complete mess. So I don't know how
horrible.
much of
Yeah,
that. I don't put that all on him, but it would be interesting to see who would be the guy who, I would think, if you're the Chiefs and whatever, if it's, after this Super Bowl or if it, they win and Andy Reid wants to ride off into the sunset, or if it's a couple, 2 years from now, I could see why you would want to keep someone on the staff and just elevate them because continuity and you've had a lot of success, and you've got two guys on the staff who have been head coaches. And for all the Bears fans who like to, just rip Matt Nagy like he was the worst. I mean, he's got an NFL Coach of the Year on his resume. So and truth be told, if it's not for a double doink that sent them out of the playoffs, people might feel far differently about Matt Nagy as well. So it's one of those things. It gets back to little moments in the playoffs can really define your career in just an outsized way. And so, but it's a long-winded way of saying, I could see them going in either direction if Andy Reid did choose to retire this year or next.
yeah. As far as the Niners, they've been one of the kind of, I would say, one of the best teams for sure. Pretty consistent. And Brock Purdy basically just wins, even though I mean he got blown out by the Niners on Christmas night, or by the Ravens rather. The Ravens blew them out, and I thought the Ravens. I actually thought I don't know what I thought. I think I thought the Niners were going to win that day for some reason, but Baltimore just had their way with them, and Purdy had
Hmm.
like 4 interceptions, I think. But for the most part, outside of that 3 game, they had like what 5 wins in a row, lost 3 in a row, and then they went and won I think 6 in a row, and then they played Baltimore. Baltimore blew them out, and they basically won out, I believe. Uh, as far as the Niners go, defense is good. They probably are the best overall team, but obviously, the X factor comes down to Brock Purdy. What's he going to do in the biggest game of his life? As you said, the Niners are favored, but I still would feel if the Niners did win, I don't think I'd be surprised. They are, like you said, they're favored. They are really good. I would assume it would be a close game. Maybe, like you said, a bounce goes their way here or there. Christian McCaffrey always scores touchdowns. The defense could have a big day. But I would imagine it would have to be a pretty close game if the Niners did win and Purdy had to do either just enough or was the X factor and just balled out that day. But as far as the Niners go, how do you feel about him and Brock Purdy leading the way for them?
So, what we've seen in the playoffs is Purdy has really gotten off to some slow starts in both the games that the Niners have had, but
Hmm.
he's come back in the second half and played better and similar to the way he's played during the regular season. But he'll throw he has thrown some very interceptable passes. He's been
Yeah.
fortunate at times in the playoffs, a couple of, I think two in each game by both the Packers and then the Lions that were not picked off, which obviously, again, those are huge game changing moments where if you come down with them, I mean, Kindle Vildor, if you don't let it hit off your face mask, right? It's a completely different football game. So, or who was it? Who was it for the Packers? Was it, God, I'm trying to remember now. It wasn't Rashawn Gary. It was, but nevertheless, whoever it was, like there's a pick six waiting for the Packers there. So there's a couple of moments there where if, the opposing team holds on to the football, I don't think the 49ers are in this position.
Yep.
But I agree with you on the roster, number 2 through 53, the 49ers have the advantage on the Chiefs. So the question is, can Brock Purdy just kind of do what he's done for the most part, execute the game plan, and then avoid some of those throwing some of those passes that are interceptable. And if he happens to throw a couple of interceptable balls, will the Chiefs make plays on those? That's kind of like the way I look at it. I think if I do feel like if Purdy avoids the turnovers, I do think the 49ers will score some points against this good Chiefs defense, because I do think what Kyle Shanahan brings to the table, the ability with Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Ayuk, you've got so many weapons that teams need to be afraid of and aware of. And then the way he just camouflages everything with formations. The 49ers don't run a ton of plays, but they just have a bunch of different looks, which makes their plays look different to the opposing defense. But they run the same plays over and over very effectively, which is part of the reason why they're such a good offense. So it's one of those things where I think if Purdy avoids the mistakes, I definitely think the 49ers will end up winning this game. The question is, does he avoid the mistakes? And,
Yeah.
this is one of those things too where, I don't know if people forget, but it always feels like we have a very slow starting first quarter with the Super Bowl. I
Yeah.
just think,
Right.
because I think everybody's like, all right, like they're trying to feel it out. And especially if you haven't been there before, a lot of, although I guess both teams have, plenty of guys, because the 49ers did play the Chiefs, whatever it was,
Hmm.
back in 2020. So,
Yeah.
but, it always does feel like nerves and just the whole pomp and circumstance that like what is it? It's scheduled for a 5:30 kickoff, so we'll see what time it actually kicks off. This is one of those things where every year it's like it always feels like it's at least 15 minutes later than it's actually scheduled to start. Which that throws players out of their rhythm. They're standing out on the field much longer than they usually are. So that's why it always feels like it takes teams a lot longer to get in the rhythm of things. And so we'll see ultimately how it plays out. But and that's the thing where Brock Purdy, we'll see if his inexperience shows, because he never has played in the Super Bowl. And so for someone like him, who everything's been like, can he actually lead this team to a Super Bowl? This is one of those moments where he's going to have to fight those nerves and just go out and try and play like it's a normal football game, which we all know it's not.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that when you mentioned that about the slow kind of first halves and everything, the pomp and circumstance. I think I even mentioned or brought that up last year too. I
Hmm.
remember thinking about how it seems like a lot of these games do kind of start out slow. It's like I don't know, 7-3 maybe in the second quarter, or halfway to halftime. Although last year's game was pretty high scoring. I don't remember the first half score, although I think Philly was up if I'm not mistaken. But either way, that got to be pretty high scoring. But yeah, I was thinking about that. And maybe that benefits a guy like Purdy if he gets off the slow starts and he kind of gets his feet under him. They stay in the game, and then second half comes around, and then it's just Purdy and does this thing. I was thinking too. So Kyle Shanahan, maybe outside of Andy Reid, is the best coach in the league right now. Certainly, maybe in the NFC, but he kind of. I guess if you want to talk legacy, I've been hearing people say this too about he kind of needs this Super Bowl because you think about the 28-3 game with the Falcons, Patriots when he was the
Hmm.
coordinator there, and he already lost one a couple of years ago against these Chiefs, or the Chiefs
Hmm.
anyway.
Yep.
And playoff losses last couple of years. So not that if he loses this game, he's going to be there next year, of course, but yeah, he might be one of the best offensive guys in the league, but obviously having the ring on your finger is what he needs at
Yeah.
this point.
No, so I listen, I think Kyle Shanahan is far and away the best offensive play caller in the league. And I would say, and I honestly, I don't even think that is up for debate. I think anybody who, I read and watch a lot, and anybody who covers the league closely will tell you that Kyle Shanahan is pretty unanimously thought of as the best play caller in the league. But of course, the quarterback has been an issue for them. And, I do think this is, for legacy purposes, it's one of those things where I do think it's really big for the 49ers, because, you know, it's not getting to the Super Bowl. They've already done that, been there, done that, right? And so now they really, and again, they're the favorite, and I don't know how you can like if you think about it, all the conversations around like the team building, how do you go about it? What's the best way to do it? The Brock Purdy, 49ers are like the alternate universe to if you can't land the quarterback, well, go about it and do it the way the 49ers have. Well, here's the thing. Brock Purdy right now we know is obviously on that rookie contract, but
Hmm.
it is kind of like win now for the 49ers because Brock Purdy only has a couple more years left, and all
Yeah.
of a sudden, all these great players surrounding him you're not going to be able to retain them all. And truth be told, that outside of the quarterback, as players age, they fall off a lot quicker in football. It's just a brutal sport, takes its toll on you. So while you people like to build up a great roster around your quarterback, who wouldn't? The truth is that, that has its limitations. And I think the 49ers, and I know Kyle Shanahan recognizes the opportunity here. You only get so many cracks at it. And so even though they're going up against Mahomes, it's one of those things where if they can't finish the job, the entire offseason for the 49ers is going to be devastating. Kyle Shanahan's going to have to sit with another Super Bowl loss, on his ledger the entire offseason. So the more the more I think about it, the more I keep coming back to I do believe that the 49ers, if Brock Purdy can avoid that mistake, will win this game. But again, it's just you kind of never know how a guy's going to perform on these big stages until you get out there and see him do it. So,
Yeah.
but from a talent standpoint and scheme standpoint, I do think Kyle Shanahan and the Niners are have the advantage. The other problem, I guess, the one big criticism of Kyle Shanahan for me is that I do believe, he gets too conservative at the end of the half, right? And
Hmm.
like we saw
Hmm.
that play out against the Packers, where they were just more than happy to settle for whatever it was, like a 47-yard field goal for Jake Moody at the end of the half.
Yeah.
And this is where I differ. Like I think if you have a good offense, you want to be more aggressive and try and create that 2-for-1. But I know Kyle Shanahan, and it's not just him. There's a lot of coaches in the league who when they have the ball in that position, their first priority is not to let the other team score, right? Like they don't want to give the like. Of course, they're trying to add points to the scoreboard for their team, but above all else, and I've heard Tom Brady say this as well, in that when they're entering a 2-minute drill, the first priority is to make sure at the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half. The first priority is don't let the other team score any more points. So you have to be methodical in your approach. I just think Kyle Shanahan has been way too conservative though in that, and maybe it is because like Brock Purdy will throw an interceptable ball from time to time,
Yeah.
but I do think it's the biggest game of the year, and we'll see how he plays it out. But that's been something that has driven me crazy a little bit during Kyle Shanahan's tenure, is that he's too conservative at the end of the half when his team has the football. And sometimes in close games when you're trailing by 7 points, those are the drives that you go back and wish you could have done something differently with.
Yeah, against Detroit, did you think the Lions had that one in the bag, or were you expecting the Lions, maybe not to blow it, but were you thinking the Niners can still, come back and maybe win this
Mm.
thing?
Um. So I was definitely at the half when they kicked the field goal instead of taking the touchdown. I was all for that. I thought I was down with it. I always go back to analytically the whole idea of going for it on fourth down near the goal line. One of the huge pluses in your favor is that if you fail, you're putting the team pinned
Yeah.
back at near their old own goal line. However, in that situation, the Lions had seconds left, and so they weren't going to get that benefit. So I was totally cool with them kicking the field goal, and then I think that put them up 24-7, if memory serves right. So that made it a 3-score game at the minimum, 2 touchdowns, 2 extra points, and then you only get 16. So in that way, I thought it was a good move to make it a 3-score game. But then where things went a little sideways, and where I thought the Niners started to have a chance, was the Niners come out at half and they kick a field goal, and so they don't score the touchdown, so they make it to whatever it was, 24-10 at that point. Then the Lions on their first possession, come down, and instead of kicking a field goal on fourth and whatever it was, three or something like that, I think with the Josh Reynolds doesn't come up with the catch. That's where I start to wonder, like, why Dan Campbell, where I think he let it get away from him, because
Yeah.
in that same moment, if you kick the field goal, and of course you have to make it, so that's where we can start to debate the decision. But if they kick the field goal, they're now in the exact same spot they were at halftime, where they're up by three scores. However, they've taken like 8 more minutes off of the clock, right? So now
Yeah.
you've put the 49ers in a position where you've just made it that much harder for them to come back and complete this comeback. So that's where, when he went for it, I was saying, and this was even before Josh Reynolds drops the football, but going for it, that was where I was like, I don't know about
Yeah.
this. I think you're giving the 49ers a chance to get back into the ball game, because if they come up with a stop, well, now they've got a chance here to really gain some momentum. And so that's where I think the Lions let them back in that game. Now again, if he attempts to kick the field goal and Badgley misses, because Badgley hasn't been very consistent, well then, my argument is out the window anyway. But that's where I think I would have opted for the field goal, because I think you've already, it's playing to your advantage. And so in that moment when they decided to go for it on fourth down, and I felt like they were giving the 49ers a path back into the football game.
Yeah, I thought in the second half, when the Lions went for it both times, I thought they should kick the field goal, because especially the second time, because at that point, it just felt like, okay, they're giving them some momentum, and then they just kept going for it. And I get that that's
Hmm.
what the Lions do. They go for it. That's why they were, largely in this situation to begin with. But one game, winner take all, it just felt like, okay, just kick it and take the points that
Hmm.
you can get. But do you like the fact that teams are so analytically inclined to go for two more than ever, or do you feel like in this
Well,
situation?
so is it
Go ahead.
going for two, or is it on fourth down? Are you saying, or
Oh,
just all of it kind of wrapped up together? Like, because
yeah, that's true.
they're
Whether it's
different
going for
things.
two or going for it on fourth down, I mean, yeah,
I do, for the most part. I do like the approach to being more willing to go for it on fourth down, and this is where too. But it depends on how you're approaching it. And the one thing I think the Lions, Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson really did well was that they made it not just a philosophy, but by making it your identity and being aggressive, you've also given yourself and your play caller the advantage of knowing on third down you don't need to pick up that fourth down, and that is so critical to going for it on fourth down and being willing to go for it on fourth down. Is that if you're going to do that, you want to have the ability to say, okay, I don't need to throw a pass past the sticks here, right? If I throw something underneath, and if it's third and six, and I throw something underneath to pick up 3 or 4 yards, give my receiver an opportunity to pick up the first down. Or if he gets tackled, I know I'm going for it on fourth down, and I've made it a much more manageable fourth down. I think that's really the key, right? So that's where I don't like it sometimes, when you see a team and you kind of like look over, and in particular, because it's fresh in my memory, I remember moments where Matt Eberflus seemed to be making a decision in the moment where, all right, he was like mulling it over on fourth down. Are we going for it? And there were moments where he would end up going for it. And there were other moments during the season where he'd end up punting it. But it truly did, when you looked at the camera. Now, yeah, I can't tell you definitively if this is what he was thinking, but it always seemed like he was thinking it through in those moments. And sometimes I think if you know, or it's like you want to know, okay, on third down and 7, if we pick up 5 yards and it's fourth and 2 or less, we are going. That's the advantage. You have to know that in those moments. You can't be mulling it over when your player is tackled, right at the line, or right at the first down marker, right in front of it. And you can't then be deciding on fourth and 1, okay, are we going to go for this? Because that's where I think you kind of lose the advantage in those moments.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Basically, it sounds like you think, assuming Purdy has a pretty clean game, you have the
Hmm.
Niners winning, right?
I do. I do think the Niners will win, but again, this is making the assumption that Brock Purdy
Yeah,
plays, closer to he. I think I think if Brock Purdy plays the way he played against both the Packers and Lions, then I think I'll probably end up looking foolish because I do think, the chances are likely that at some point you keep throwing interceptable footballs, and there will be a defense that makes you pay. And the Chiefs have been one of the best defenses all season. So, in that sense, I think I will end up looking foolish, but maybe it's just because I have a little more faith in him stepping up to the moment. But and then he will. I think their skilled position players will end up making the Chiefs, and I think ultimately we haven't really seen the Chiefs offense really be forced into a position this year where they've had to keep pace with another elite offense. That's where I think we would finally see some of the limitations of this Chiefs offense come to fruition. But again, this is all based on the fact that Brock Purdy needs to play the way he's played for the majority of the season. If he plays like he did in the playoffs earlier, or even against like how he did against the Ravens on Christmas Day, then then ultimately, then I think Patrick Mahomes will just end up leading the Chiefs to a third Super Bowl in what would it be 5 years. So
Yeah. Do you feel like the game will be close, or do you think the Niners could put up, win 31-20 or something like that? I'm thinking like 27-24, something like that.
yeah, I think it'll be a fairly close game. I don't think the Niners will run away and hide, and I certainly don't think the Chiefs will do that. Um, I think we're looking at a game within a touchdown. Now the Chiefs could obviously still cover the spread in that scenario, but I think we end up looking at a game that's a one score game ultimately.
Do you think if the Niners win, Purdy is the MVP, or I mean, if he just does enough, is it like Christian McCaffrey probably coming away with that?
So it's always like I always Super Bowl MVP is such a weird thing because
Yeah.
they they have to vote before the game's actually over
Hmm.
because all the reporters who are covering the game need to get down to the locker room, down to the field, so they can do their post game interviews. So you end up having a vote for the MVP before the game is even wrapped, which is always one of the most absurd things I think I think you do in sports
Yeah.
because people end up putting like a lot of importance on it. And sometimes it doesn't always go, I think, to the guy who's most deserving. So it's hard. I don't think I could accurately predict
Yeah.
how things will end up going. Right. And ultimately too, if, if McCaffrey, has a big rushing game, that could be the reason why the 49ers win. But, maybe they use, Debo in near the goal line. And so it's like McCaffrey could have 150 yards from scrimmage, but if he doesn't score a touchdown or two, but like Debo ends up scoring two touchdowns, well then
Yeah.
who knows? So
Yeah.
a lot of times it's predicated on who ends up if you have a guy who scores a couple of touchdowns and he has a decent yardage day, a lot of times that guy will end up being, your Super Bowl MVP. And if you don't, if you've just got them spread out, well then you're talking, it's almost
Yeah.
always the quarterback in that scenario if he's got two or three touchdown passes. So, I always have a hard time predicting, Super Bowl MVP. If anything, I will always, if I'm making a play, I'll always look through the MVP odds and start to look at some guys who I think could be longer odds. Like I think I haven't looked since the beginning of the week on the MVP odds. Like Travis Kelsey, I think his odds are a little bit longer. He might be like 10-1 or something. And that's a scenario where I could see if he got two touchdowns, right? Like I could very easily see him getting, Super Bowl MVP. So it's one of those things where I'd be looking to make a value play at who's got some longer odds. Um, that would be, maybe Isaiah Pacheco, right? Because like I
Yeah.
could see a scenario where he scores two or three short touchdowns, and that would be the path to victory. Mahomes, it just doesn't feel like it's good value betting on Patrick Mahomes because obviously, um, like I said, there's a couple different paths for why other guys could get it on the Chiefs, and you know, ultimately, it's not a good value play to bet Patrick Mahomes to win the MVP.
Yeah, yeah. Before we wrap up, I'm sure you're pretty excited about the Bears having three Hall of Famers going in with Mongo and Hester and Julius Peppers. So that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, listen, in terms of excited, I am so happy that Steve Mongo McMichael is getting his due recognition. He's somebody who absolutely deserved it. The what he was able to do. He was the unheralded star on the that vaunted '85 Bears defense, and not just '85, but the entire '80s, the decade of the '80s. And Mongo ended up being a member of the Bears for a lot longer than a lot of those other players on that '85 defense. For the longest time, Steve Mongo McMichael was the all-time leader in games played in Chicago Bears history before I think Patrick Manley finally passed him, near the end of his career. But for the longest time, Mongo held that record, which I always thought was a really cool record to hold. But then again, like he did the dirty work, and he rushed the passer from the interior, which sometimes is something that you don't always get enough credit for, right? Like because you're constantly facing those double teams on the inside, and people having to account for him is what made Dan Hampton and Richard Dent Hall of Famers. So it's an honor that is it's overdue. And then like so as a player on the field, I'm so happy he got it. But then also knowing Mongo personally, I've hosted several pre and post games with him in my career, and he is just a great guy, right? So like to see a guy who justly deserves it, but then to also know him personally and to know that he is such a good guy, it just it really does warm my heart. Of course, it sucks what he's going through, suffering from ALS. And so that in itself is just heartbreaking. But I'm glad he finally is going to receive his just due and will be honored as an inductee in the next Hall of Fame class. As far as Devin Hester goes, I was never somebody who always was like stumping for him. I think this is where you quibble with Hall of Fame, right? Like the famous, right? Like he is somebody who did what he did better than anybody. I guess the only I have no problem with him going in. I always get back to though. I look at some of the players. Like I guess this is where I have a problem with the way the Pro Football Hall of Fame does it. I wish they weren't so stingy in terms of letting players in because I believe it's like is it 5 members every year who can actually go in as players, and then they've got some other whatever it is contributor like set. I can't remember if it's 7 or whatever it ends up whatever they end up allowing to go in. But it's a little too limited in my mind, and there's a lot of players who are on the outside looking in who I personally would put in before I put in Devin Hester. But I don't have any problem with Devin Hester going in. I just wish the Pro Football Hall of Fame would recognize some of these other players as well. Someone like Torrey Holt, I believe, is an absolute no-brainer Hall of Famer, but he's still on the outside looking in. There's some other great pass rushers as well who I think deserve to be recognized who have not gone in yet. So I have no problem with Hester going in. There's a lot of guys who I would have put in before I put him in. But I'm glad to see he's going to get a chance. So that'll make it a pretty cool ceremony when they do that at the beginning of July. And then of course Pep. I mean, he was his tenure in Chicago was short lived, but
Yeah.
he was always one of the not just a great pass rusher, but he played the run fiercely as well. So I think that's why it's so easy for him to be a first ballot Hall of Famer is because he played the run just as well as he did excel in the pass rush. So he was a no brainer. But for Bears fans, when they went out and signed him and brought him in, he really did kind of, I think, rejuvenate and kind of help the defense hang on and have another second life during Lovie Smith's tenure for another 3 or so years after. Which if they had not done that, I don't know if Lovie Smith would have been able to extend his coaching career for the Bears as long as he did. But bringing him in really did help Brian Urlacher and Peanut Tillman and Lance Briggs kind of extend their careers as a dominant defense for a few years there.
So the $1 million question. So are you all on Caleb Williams, or I mean, are you done with Fields basically? Are you thinking they have to draft him, or are you kind of not sure yet?
No, I'm at the point where I think the Bears need to move past
Yeah,
Justin Fields.
figured. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just there's too many instances on tape where you see some open receivers
Hmm.
and his or guys who are NFL open where I just think he's reluctant to make those throws. And at this point, I'd be surprised if he all of a sudden comes back and shows you that he's willing to make those throws. Now, I'm not saying he can't necessarily be successful in the NFL. I think you know there's a chance with some better skilled players, a better offensive line around him, where he might be able to, help a team, lead a team to the playoffs. But I don't think you'll ever go into the playoffs with Justin Fields as your quarterback and feel like you're set up, in a great spot. You'll always be wondering, okay, is he going to be able to compete with some of the better quarterbacks who he's going up against? And so with the position the Bears are in, because Ryan Poles was able to secure the number one overall pick, I think it's too good of an opportunity. Select Caleb Williams. That's where I would go. But if if Washington is willing to like absolutely blow you away with an offer, and you like Drake May, close to as much as you like Caleb Williams, then I'm okay with that scenario as well. But I'm hoping that Ryan Poles drafts Caleb Williams because as a Bears fan for far too long, we've been hoping and wishing for a quarterback. And I think when you've got an opportunity in a draft where most evaluators will tell you he's one of the best to ever come along out of the draft, I don't want to miss that opportunity. So let's draft Caleb, and hopefully for once the Bears will be the beneficiary of some great quarterback play. So I'm hoping that's the direction that Ryan Poles goes.
Yeah, because if he doesn't make that pick and then they go with Fields or something, and then Caleb Williams is great elsewhere, Poles is done basically, unless it works out with someone else at quarterback. But at least if he takes Caleb Williams and for some reason that doesn't work out, and there's got to be a lot of other factors that go into this team and all that, but it seems like the consensus is take Caleb Williams. So if for some reason that doesn't work out, I mean, I don't know what happens to Ryan Poles and the Bears in general, but it just feels like it's too safe. I don't know if you want to say safe of a pick, but it's safer pick than to pass on that. And then he's great somewhere else, and then it's like, how did you miss on this again? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, look, now you hope a GM is not playing like, but I do think that's
Yeah.
absolutely a valid point, and it's the human nature of if you're the general manager of a football team, knowing that you've already passed on CJ Stroud, right? You know that it's going to be on your resume if you willingly choose to pass on Caleb Williams as well. You better be absolutely right that he's not going to be great in this league. And but again, you'd hope that your general manager of a football team does not approach it that way,
Yeah.
but you could understand why, as a human being, you're in that spot. If he goes forward with Justin Fields, it's much more risky. I don't.
Yeah.
There's not enough on the field on the tape that has shown you that you can know decisively that he's going to be your quarterback. And then, oh, by the way, we all know that he's entering his fourth year, so you're going to have to make a decision on his contract as well. So everything about Justin Fields makes your job more difficult, right?
Yeah.
So listen, if you draft Caleb Williams and he ends up not living up to and not being a great quarterback, um, ultimately it'll probably cost Ryan Poles his job, but that's kind of the gig, right?
Yeah.
But but you know that's where if you're someone like Ryan Poles and you think, okay, Drake May's the better quarterback, well then you better maneuver it, trade to the Commanders, and draft Drake May if that's the way you feel. But ultimately, whatever you do with the quarterback this offseason, even if it is moving forward with Justin Fields, this decision is in all likelihood going to determine Ryan Poles his future as the Bears GM. Whatever he chooses to do, however it plays out, this one decision will determine whether or not he is the Bears GM, you know, 5 years from now, in all likelihood.
Yeah. It just if the Bears had drafted, let's say they drafted Patrick Mahomes, whatever year that was,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
2017.
not to
2017. We never forget here in Chicago, Will.
not to say that they win all these Super Bowls or anything like that, but do you think? I mean, who knows? I guess it's like who knows what would have happened, but uh, do you think Mahomes is still great, or Matt Nagy is the coach of, so it's still the Nagy and Mahomes thing. But
Hmm.
do you feel like Mahomes still? It's hard to say he'd be what he is today, but
Yeah, listen, I think he'd be great. I don't know. I don't know if
yeah,
he's got. I don't know if he's got
yeah,
two Super Bowls. I don't know if he would have
right,
won one Super Bowl yet. But I
yeah,
do feel pretty strongly he would be great. Now I do think coaching matters.
yeah,
So is it possible that he would be would he play football a little closer to like the way Josh Allen does as
yeah,
like a little bit more of a gunslinger? Would he potentially throw more interceptions if he didn't have somebody like Andy Reid in his ear?
right,
Excelling
yeah,
and teaching him. Yeah, I think it's possible, but I still think, as you can see with the Bills and Josh Allen, you could still win football games that way, right? More often than not. And chances are, if Patrick Mahomes was playing that style in Chicago, Josh Allen might have a Super Bowl victory to
yeah,
his name because he wouldn't be going up against Patrick Mahomes, who's ruining, all his shots at the Super Bowl. So,
yeah,
it's one of those sliding door moments where I do think Pat Mahomes would be great. It's just I don't know. I don't know if he would have a Super Bowl win just yet, but I do
right,
think he would be. I do think he would be great, no matter where
yeah,
he ended up.
yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, it's like it's hard to play the what if game and be like, well, if this happened, would he be doing this? But you're right. I think he'd be great. Maybe like you said, maybe it's a little bit lower on the bar as far
Hmm.
as, but even Josh Allen's great, so makes sense. But anyway, great talking with you again. And another year of the NFL was almost done already. Did you watch the Pro Bowl last weekend?
I did not actually, and it's
Didn't
and
either.
last year I did watch quite a bit. I'm trying to remember what the heck I did last Sunday because it was the first Sunday where I didn't have football, like
Right.
where I was like. So I'm trying to remember what I actually did. I don't even remember, Will, but no, I was not going out of my way to watch the Pro Bowl games last Sunday. I think I was just running around doing some errands and and my daughter who is big into theater, she had some theater stuff that I was attending last Sunday, so that ate up most of my day
Yeah.
last Sunday. But no, the Pro Bowl games was not high on my list of things to do to the point where I did not even check in. Like
Yeah.
usually I'll kind of be like, okay, what happened? I didn't even check out anything related to it on social media. I didn't look at the clips. I mean, I do know that Jalen Johnson had a couple of plays to help secure the victory for his flag football team. But outside of that, I did not watch. I did not watch highlights. So I was a little more into, if anything, I was kind of checking out the NHL All Star
Same. Yeah.
festivities because, and I'm not saying I like the NHL All Star stuff better, but I had some more time on Friday night, so I watched their skills competition. A lot more of that than I did the actual Pro Bowl stuff. Honestly, I think the only thing I even care about now of the Pro Bowl games is I'll sometimes get sucked into a little bit of the dodgeball just because I like a good old fashioned dodgeball game. But aside from that, like flag football, Pro Bowl games is not for me. Which is why I don't think I'll have any interest when it becomes an Olympic sport in 2026. So,
Yeah.
nevertheless.
I actually dominated at dodgeball at a work function a couple years ago, so maybe I am on an NFL level in something.